Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Coffee with Friends. As always, before we begin, I'd like to remind you that the guests on our live streams reflect a diverse set of values, morals, and ethics that may not reflect the morals, values, and ethics of the Misfit Amish. Coffee with Friends may also discuss trauma of all sorts to include all types of abuse. Viewers and listeners may find it unsettling and triggering. If this live stream causes you distress, please cease listening until you're able to listen again. You may also seek support from your trusted folks and qualified mental health professionals. With that being said, I'd like to welcome Monica. Hi, Monica.
Hello, Mary.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and I love your coffee mug. I got one too. I pulled
Oh,
out the cutest one I had just for this.
I have a whole collection. like
Oh,
like legitimately I have like a shelf with like
oh,
a collection of
that's
probably 100
wonderful.
coffee mugs. So,
That's a good thing to
but
collect.
I have my go-tos. It just makes my coffee feel like a little better, like it tastes better.
Yeah,
You
right?
have a good mug to go with it.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I was born and raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. That was all I knew. I thought our group was completely unique. We did have, Jehovah's Witnesses are most known for proselytizing, going door to door. We did have a group of Mennonites in our territory, it was called, where we went preaching. So occasionally I would go and preach to them. And they were always very sweet and friendly, but I don't think the conversations led anywhere. Um, and yeah, and interestingly, later on in life, I found out after I moved away, grew up and moved away from my little congregation in Hayward, Wisconsin, that there was someone from the Mennonite community that was preached to and joined the Jehovah's Witnesses and married one of the girls in the congregation where I grew up. So that was kind of scandalous.
Oh my God. Like, so you were preaching to like the Mennonites.
Yes.
Did you write them letters too?
We would write letters. Sounds terrible now. When people would die, like we go through the obituaries and we would write letters and share what we thought was the hope for the dead because we believe in a earthly resurrection. So we would share that with people when they lost a loved one, or sometimes if we found someone and then we couldn't find them anymore, we would write a letter. I don't think we didn't do letter writing as much then as they do now. So yeah, I don't think we specifically targeted the Mennonites with that.
Well, I will tell you that up until the time I wrote a letter to the local congregation where I threatened to seek legal counsel on my options if they don't stop writing me letters, the Jehovah's Witnesses here were writing me letters. It was so,
Yeah. They do it
I
ever
don't,
since COVID. They do that much more because we're required. And now they've changed it a little bit. Now you can just check a box and say you went out in the ministry. But for my whole life, for the history of the organization, you had to keep track of how many hours you spent in the formal preaching work in the ministry, and you had to report that every month, along with how many magazines you left with people and how many return visits you made, meaning calling back on someone and speaking to them again and following up, how many Bible studies you conducted. Like, we would keep track of all of that. And then when the pandemic hit, it was like, how are we going to preach? Because we're on lockdown and we can't go door to door. So then the letter writing became, I mean, we had done it a little bit before, but that became a big deal. And I think once people got into the letter writing, a lot of them thought, oh, this is way easier than going door to door and actually having to talk to people. So I'll just do that.
oh my gosh. Well, I'll tell you, I haven't received a letter since I said I was going to seek legal counsel.
Yeah, that usually works. I think they'll take you off the list.
I asked them because I had asked them. I have written them several times and asked them to remove me from the list. So, anyways, but I digress. That's not really why we're here convening today on our unholy chat. I mean, we came here because I met Monica because Monica reached out to me, and one of the things that we both care about is the mandated shunning and its impacts on people and relationships and communities. So, what has happened is there is a research project that is going on. There's a survey you can take. There's a link in the comments on this video, there's a link in the description um, where you can go and you can participate in this survey. I did it. It can take like 60 to 90 minutes. It's pretty straightforward, but it asks questions like if you were baptized into the group, uh, what type of impact you saw as a child, or stuff like that. And this is really to discuss that. What is mandated shunning? And to extend an invitation for you to be able to decide if you're able to respond to the questions in the survey or do a personal interview with the researchers, or maybe one or both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, what is mandated shunning?
Yeah. So initially, this effort, we had called it Shunning is a Crime. The goal is to make it actually illegal, to make it recognized as a hate crime, as a human rights violation, because they're not respecting your right to leave a religion or change your beliefs if you're being punished for leaving, for making a change, or that change being forced on you, because we know that can happen, right? Either we get kicked out or we choose to leave, but one way or another, there's really no way to get out of a lot of these high demand groups unscathed. You can't leave with your dignity and with your family and friends. So the mandated shunning came out after a court case in Belgium, where someone who had experienced shunning got a group of people together and brought a lawsuit saying that this was a human rights violation. And at first they won, and then the Jehovah's Witness leadership, called Watchtower, they appealed, and they won on the appeal. And the judge said, you need more people, because there just weren't enough to prove that this is a broad phenomenon. And of course, the leadership was saying, this is a couple of disgruntled people. This is not representative of most people's experience. These are just, complainers and, a few crazy people, basically. So what they learned with that court case was that they needed to refine the terminology and explain that it's mandated, as in the group forces you to shun. Because what they did was they brought in the active Jehovah's Witnesses. I think you have experienced similar, right? These groups will bring in busloads of their active members and contradict everything that we're saying. So that's what happened. They brought these people in that were the family that were doing the shunning, and they said, oh, we're not doing this because we're told to or because it's a group rule. We're just doing this out of our personal choice. So we realized that the term mandated needed to be a part of this, because it's always okay for any of us to cut someone toxic out of our life or to set personal boundaries. And that is a personal choice. But that's very different than group mandated shunning, where oftentimes it's in the rule book, there's official rules, or the priest or leader or elder is enforcing it, or just the community in general is enforcing it. And if you don't comply, there will be pressure on you. Your social status will go down, or maybe you will also be shunned. So people are coerced into this, or they're told also. There's a lot of hate speech and framing of those who leave as backsliders or evil or apostates, or they've gone off to Satan, or all of these horrible things. They're contagious. They're like a disease. They're poisonous, and you just can't even touch them or talk to them. They're unclean. They're dirty. So all of this really dehumanizing language is used, and so that these things coerce people into shunning. And oftentimes it's then something that if we're in this group, we know ahead of time it will happen to us, right? We can anticipate it, and it's used by these groups as a mechanism to control people with fear.
You're describing this, and you mentioned, like, they brought in current members. Yes, I have experienced that. I'm not really going to delve into that, but if you want to see that, that is actually shown in a documentary called Sins of the Amish. With that being said, you mentioned the doctrine. Like, even in this book, which I read as a teenager, some Amish use this book officially, like teenagers might read it, others might not. But ultimately, when you get baptized into the church, they have the Glaubensbekenntnis, which is the confessions of faith, and Article 16 and 17, they mandate shunning, and they mandate how to shun people in a godly way. They have a whole list of Bible verses they use to justify it. So regardless of how they interpret it, regardless of whether they call it excommunication or shunning or what they call it, like we used to call it bon and maido, regardless of whatever language you're using, that's still considered shunning. I know some Anabaptists use the term avoidance, excommunication, tough love, like all of these things. And so when you're talking about that, what happens is they distort the narrative. When you go and you collect data like this research study, what then further can happen is, because of the well thought out questions, and I would say they are very well thought out. Again, I took the survey this morning, so it's fresh on my mind. And when I say they're well thought out, I mean, like, asking me questions about, even as a child, did I participate in mandated shunning? Well, what do you think it was when we shouldn't play with children that people saw as lesser than? Or when people shouldn't play with us because we were seen as a widow's children, or because we were needy? Like, there's a mandated social isolation to maintain your own status. You are almost required to do it. Otherwise, there can be repercussions. Or even when you were at a church or a wedding, and our church was, quite frankly, all 5 Amish churches I belonged to had church in our homes. We didn't have meeting houses. We didn't have church houses. We didn't have any of that. But all of that, when we would go to church, there's like a specific way that they conduct church business. So the bishop would announce that we're going to have all unbaptized members leave the building, and we would have baptized members stay in the building. And so then typically that would be children, because the norm for us was to get baptized at like 17 or 18. So if somebody who was baptized left with the children and the maybe young adults, because there might be a few here and there who did not get baptized right at 17 or even 18 or 19. I know there were some, but it was not very often, and they received a lot of pressure to become baptized. But regardless, everybody would know, even the children would know that they were in trouble.
Yeah.
And then once I was baptized and I was privy to that, they would publicly, let me show you something. That is the confession pose.
Oh.
That is the confession pose.
Yeah.
And I don't, if that's not public humiliation and shame,
Right.
what is that?
Yeah.
So when you talk about this fear, people engage in acts of mandated shunning once they're baptized to a deeper degree because they're afraid of being put in that position in front of the church, on your
Right.
knees, on the floor.
Yeah. And the researchers, I just got to talk to them in person last month, and they were saying that with the information they've already gathered, they're seeing that oftentimes baptism or some other tradition or ceremony or some sort of symbolic act is used as part of the coercion because it tricks the person into thinking they signed up for this, that this is their choice. And if they don't comply, then it's their fault because they agreed to this. But you can't agree to abuse and humiliation.
I didn't, yeah. And then to top it all off, even as children, when you went to those formal events, if there were people that were in the bond and their status was supposed to be shunned, they weren't even allowed to sit the same as they normally would if they were not in trouble with the church. Even as children, you knew that person was in trouble, even if they didn't do the specific church business thing that Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you talk about that, when you think about that, after church, we would have a meal. And at the meal, they would set a separate table for the people who were in the bond. For the person who is in the bond, they would have their own separate shameful table. It was the sinner's table.
And that's right out of a scripture. We discussed, these groups will use the same scriptures. They'll apply it slightly differently, but that scripture, not even eating a meal with such a man. So
Yes.
for Jehovah's Witnesses, that would mean we would not socialize with them. We would never invite them to our house for dinner. We wouldn't meet at a restaurant for dinner or go on a picnic with them. So unfortunately, then if some member of the family were disfellowshipped, let's say the mom or the dad, you would either invite only the people of the family that were not disfellowshipped, but that's kind of awkward. So then oftentimes you just wouldn't invite the family at all. So we'd call them get-togethers, social gatherings, at our house or at the park, and those people wouldn't be invited, or they would be forced to leave that family member at home that was disfellowshipped. And they would go along with it. They just assumed, right, that this is what they had to do. So they knew that, if they got invited, they knew without us saying that we're only inviting the people that are in good standing. And like you said earlier, children get swept up in this in a unique way, which also demonstrates how mandated this is, because children are told who they can talk to, who they cannot talk to. We learn this from the time we're young. I had an aunt that was disfellowshipped when I was 6 years old. And I was told I couldn't talk to her anymore. I didn't have any understanding of why. I didn't have anything personal against her. And I didn't talk to her for 40 years, basically. I saw her 2 times at the funerals of my grandparents, her parents. And even then, most people wouldn't talk to her. A couple of family members and the elders would maybe go up to her. And also, whenever they did, they wanted to talk to her about coming back to the group, right? The only reason we would talk to them would be if we're also going to try to get them back to the group.
Oh, my word. So one you cut out. So how long did you not talk to her?
40 years, with the exception of, I think I said hi to her at my grandparents' funerals, and that was it.
Oh my God. This is what I mean when I say that shunning tears apart families. And they do it under this guise of love often. When you have this mandated shunning like that, it tears apart families. Mm-hmm. It forever alters relationships. But one of the things that you mentioned is this thing of we only talk to people to admonish them. So we were supposed to only talk to people to admonish them to repent. And as children, like I knew I couldn't talk to that person that's in the bond. Like that person was the only people that were like people were only supposed to engage in conversations to admonish them to repent. Like if I were to walk into like somebody from my community of origin, which don't get me started on how they shunned me because they didn't even follow their own rules, but I digress. We won't rehash bygones. I've talked about this. But if I were to run into them, like they're not supposed to take anything from my hand. They're not supposed to talk to me except to admonish me to repent and return to the ways of my youth, because I have gone out into the world and I am living such a worldly life that it would be, yeah. There's this thing that many people have said they've heard from their practicing Amish loved ones, which is, it would be better if you had died as a child than for you to go out in the world and live such a sinful life, a loose life like what you're living now.
Yeah. I've heard that from Jehovah's Witness parents as well, like that they would prefer that their child die because faithful to the religion, because then they could get resurrected and still be approved by God and be together in paradise. They would prefer that they die physically than for them to leave the religion.
And so when you start talking about all of these things, do you see like some of these parallels? Like one, we used almost identical scriptures to justify it. Two, the application might have a little bit of different language and kind of like different acts. I know people who've been disinherited because they were in the bond.
It's my same aunt, the one that I didn't speak to for 40 years until I left. When I left, I had to hunt her down. I didn't even have a way to contact her. I wasn't sure where she lived. I heard she had a restaurant, and I actually called her restaurant and sent a letter to her restaurant. So I finally reconnected after 40 years, but she was disinherited, which now breaks my heart because when my grandfather died, and my grandfather was the one that never was in the religion and actually hated the way that my aunt was treated, but he died first. And then my grandma, who had converted and then brought all of the next generations into it, after he died, she was in charge of the property. And when she put it in writing, she left out that daughter. And I felt terrible. I feel terrible because my grandfather would have hated that. I mean, the idea that this daughter that was mistreated, and he hated the way that everyone treated her. And then she also got left out of the inheritance when everyone else got property, really is heartbreaking. And that aunt, she attempted suicide 2 times. She had serious alcohol addiction issues. She had a very difficult life because of this. I know it was because of the trauma of being shunned. And it was before there was, now thank goodness there's support. There's your channel. There's many channels that are drawing attention to it. There's online support groups. There's a lot more resources now, but there was none of that when she was kicked out.
Yeah. I think like one of the things that people often don't realize is that when you start talking about people dying by suicide or living with addiction, even within insular high control groups, you can still have people who die by suicide. You can still have people who live with addiction. And I see this because people often think, because of the lack of understanding about the insular group or the isolated group or the high demand group, they only see what they see. And what they see is a carefully curated narrative. But to really fully understand that, you need to know that, like, just because I was raised in an Amish in Amish homes and Amish communities doesn't mean that I didn't live with people that lived with addiction. I did. Doesn't mean I didn't live with people that attempted to die by suicide, because I did. But the tools that we had access to, the resources that we had access to, was very, very limited.
Yeah.
So I want to take this time and remind everyone that if you're struggling, you can always text 988 or you can call them. There is help out there. You don't deserve to be struggling by yourself. You do deserve support. And I do think that part of what we're talking about here is sometimes people also die by suicide, or they live with addiction because it is the only coping skills that they have. It's because they're so miserable in this environment. It's because they've experienced so much trauma and they haven't received support and resources that they need to feel like their life has meaning despite the trauma.
Right.
So reach out if you need some kind of support. There are people who care. Thank you.
Thanks for saying that.
I just really think it's critical that we understand that just because groups are isolated doesn't mean they don't have people problems.
Right. And like you said, we're not given the tools and the resources, and we're often made to be afraid of those. So like historically in the literature, Jehovah's Witness leadership would tell people you should not get outside therapy. You don't need that. All you need is to read the Bible and pray. And they really demonized like outside worldly therapists. Then I think they realized that they could get in trouble legally, and probably went through enough situations where people needed external help, and maybe, and didn't get it, or maybe did and they made a subtle change to where then they wouldn't openly condemn it. And they would even occasionally make comments like you could, get professional help or medication if needed. But most of the time, whenever they talk about having problems, they're constantly telling you, read the literature more, go preaching more, talk to the elder in the congregation who has no training in this whatsoever, in mental health or addiction issues or family problems. Like they don't have any professional training. So they're constantly giving a solution that really is not an effective one. And they've made people afraid of people in the outside world. So we're afraid that they will not understand us. They won't give us good advice. They'll maybe take us away from our faith. So even though technically they don't prevent it anymore, but as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, most of us would not reach out to get professional help.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because access to good medical care can really vary in various Amish communities, but not even just various Amish communities. There's also this element of they have these plain facilities. If you don't follow the Plain People's Project over on Substack, please go get a subscription and listen to that. You have practicing Amish women talking about the facilities, talking about their life experiences in the facilities, and reaching out and trying to get help, trying to get some kind of intervention, and how it was handled. And this is like currently happening inside of Amish communities. I've been taken to many unqualified providers for intervention that were ineffective, and in fact, some of them really did compound trauma. It can really compound trauma. And if you don't understand how it can do that, it adds layers. It makes your trauma that was like maybe one event or two events, it makes that trauma become like a layer, an onion, layers of onions, like you're just peeling back the onion. And sometimes like that's really how trauma can impact you. But having that fear of receiving intervention has to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What would make it okay for somebody inside of the Jehovah's Witnesses, for somebody who is a Jehovah's Witness? What would make it okay for them to reach out for medical intervention?
I mean, it can depend on the person, and the older you are and the longer you've been in the group, the less likely you would be to get professional help, I think, because they used to, downplay it and demonize it more than they do now. So young people with the internet, they're just a little more savvy. So I think, hopefully over time that will change a little bit. But yeah, it continues to be hard. And then even for people who leave ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, it's hard to get therapists who understand, which I'm sure you, like all of these groups that are high control groups, we've all had those stories where we do try to get a therapy then, and we just can't find someone who understands what we've gone through, which is partly what this research will address, because with there's the two parts, the survey and the interviews. And with the interviews, they're not only interviewing former members, but they're also interviewing therapists and attorneys and human rights activists and people who are like theologians or have academics who have studied religion, particularly religions that use shunning. So what they're hoping to also use the results of the research for, is to educate therapists, because they really need to have specialized training for people who have been in these high control groups, because you would treat them very differently than they present so differently from other people. So hopefully there will be more awareness of how this uniquely traumatizes people, how we don't fit into the box. Like, we might present with like dissociative identity disorder, which is really common in all of these groups. And it's not the typical, it's not like we were born this way. It was like we were traumatized or indoctrinated and made to separate from our own feelings and our own thoughts. And it was something that happened to us rather than something we were like born with and having to deal with. And there's just, unique things, like some therapists they'll observe that someone is lonely and be like, oh, well, you should go back to the group because at least you had friends there. Like, no.
No. Or here's my favorite part. And okay, I absolutely abhor mental health providers who think they're culturally competent. And I'm going to say this very clearly and distinctly because I want them to hear this. And please hear it well. When they sit there and they wax and wane poetic about a plethora of Amish stereotypes, and I say this and I give this to you as an example. If I'm telling you about, and I'm trying to process and figure out coping skills in therapy with a therapist, and one of the things that I experience is because I ran away and I escaped, they took the furniture that was supposed to be mine. It was mine, but it was only mine if I remained in the church. They took all of that. They took all of my glassware. They took all of my they took all of it. I don't want to hear about your good Amish furniture you're looking at. I don't want to hear you wax and wane poetic about the good Amish butter. I don't. What does that have to do with the trauma I'm telling you of how, as a consequence, one, they shunned me. Two, yes, I might have known it was going to happen. At the time, I might have felt like, well, I guess if this is the price I pay, it's going to be worth it because I can't stay in a place like this. That's where I was. So to sit there and to then also wax and wane poetic about, well, Amish are not a cult, and I don't call Amish a cult, but that's a whole other story. But for therapists to tell me they're not that, and then for me to be like, I'm sorry, what did you just say? And they're like, oh, well, they have Rumspringa. These are some of the I don't know how to explain how many times I've heard of this happening to people who grew up in insular religious groups. They seek out therapists and they're like, hey, I'm going to go get a therapist. And then they go to therapy and the therapist is really ill-equipped to manage or help them or to walk with them through their trauma. And then the best part of all is when they bring up forgiveness and they tell us that forgiveness has to be part of the healing process. How do you feel about that?
Oh, don't even get me started on forgiveness. Yeah. That's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because I feel like, and maybe you'll agree with this or maybe not. There's the mandated shunning, but there's also the mandated forgiveness, which is just about as bad as the mandated shunning because you don't have any personal choice in with whom you can have a close relationship or who you can personally stay away from. Because if you've been abused by someone in the congregation, but they've expressed that they're remorseful and they're now in good standing, you have to forgive them. You have to socialize with them. You have to treat them as a brother in the faith. So that's the other side of the coin of mandated shunning is the mandated forgiveness. And I had an aunt who was molested by her brother. And she was so traumatized and maybe so young, she didn't remember for many years, but she had symptoms and she wasn't doing well. And she actually did go and get some professional assistance. And because of that professional assistance she got in her late 30s, he or she, I don't know, the therapist saw all the signs of the trauma and figured out that she had been abused and was helping her to work through that. And she thought she remembered who it was. And when she confronted her brother, my uncle, he confessed. So he admitted to it. But then he immediately told the elders that he was sorry. And it had happened, of course, a long time ago. And so he was just forgiven. And he then, of course, was super zealous and out in the ministry all the time and commenting at the meetings all the time to demonstrate how pious he was. And they lived in a rural area where there was only one congregation. So they were expected to continue to go to meetings because that's a requirement, like to go to meetings multiple times a week. And she was just like, I can't do this. I can't keep going to meetings and seeing this person. And she ended up moving to a different state. Because she just couldn't handle it. But still went to the meetings, like, because she didn't realize that this was she doesn't think she has the freedom to leave the group, right? She thinks that she has to stay in no matter what. So
that's a really good point to bring up, is the opposite side of the coin and how forgiveness is weaponized, because it's wielded as a weapon, and the impacts of that long term. When you have therapists who, what they really mean is you have to come to some kind of like peace and resolution despite having experienced that. That's what they really mean.
Right.
I don't know why they don't just say that instead of using the term forgiveness, which was a weapon.
They need to come up with another term for that. You're right. I know exactly what you mean.
You know what I'm saying?
You don't ever need to talk to the person again. You can cut them out of their life. When they use forgiveness, they don't mean you have to welcome them back as a brother and treat them as if nothing happened.
You don't have to invite them over for Thanksgiving dinner or, a holiday dinner or like a birthday party or let them around your kid or, you know what I'm saying? Like, you don't have to do all that. That's not what the therapist is talking about. So I would really appreciate it if therapists could even just consider for a hot minute saying what they mean.
That's really a good point.
like I really would. But like this, that's again where like I'm so excited because 10 years ago I was made aware of like how I was approached by an ex-JW activist. I've talked about this a little bit. What I learned about JWs is the way I relate to so many of the things that y'all experience. Like, we didn't do field service. We didn't do that. We didn't do the recruitment. We were not recruiters. Okay. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the theology and doctrine and the splits, like how, like, we have this decentralized leadership because y'all have the governing body, right? Mm-hmm. All of that. Like, there's so many parallels. And it really helped me understand the long-term impacts of shunning and have the language to put it out there and to talk about it. And I can never be grateful enough for that. But here's the problem with this. When we have these interviews and these audio episodes or personal accounts, those are considered anecdotal evidence. It's not saying it doesn't happen, but it's anecdotal evidence. When you write a scientific research study and you get it approved to collect data, what researchers are going to do with this, they're going to compile the data. They're going to put together numbers and themes and commonalities between different group experiences. They're going to look at the parallels between people like Monica and myself and whomever else takes that survey. And then they're going to put it out there. And that's going to be considered a more collective experience.
Right.
That will be more weight.
Yeah. It'll be usable in courts. And in Europe, they're already in Norway. I don't know if you're aware, they a couple years ago removed Jehovah's Witnesses status as a religion. I mean, they're still free to do whatever they want. They just do not have official religious status in Norway because of the shunning, and because the shunning even affects children, which they saw as a extreme treatment of children. And the Norwegian government requires free withdrawal, meaning you're free to leave the religion. And so the state said this religion does not respect human rights, and so they're going to lose their religious registration. The appeal, though, was in February, the second appeal. So they lost the first appeal. They made a second appeal, and the Jehovah's Witnesses, the leadership, won that appeal, unfortunately. But now the state is applying to the Supreme Court in Norway. And if the state wins in the Supreme Court in Norway, then the Jehovah's Witness leadership will definitely bring it to the European Court of Human Rights, which is all of Europe. So we're really hoping we could have the results of this research by the time that might happen, because if it does, if they lose if Jehovah's Witnesses lose at that level, then there's a lot of countries in Europe that are going to do the same thing, because the Czech Republic, Sweden, Finland, Netherlands, Belgium, Spain, they're all looking at these abusive groups for things like shunning, and they're ready to take some action. And if this data will just support that. So good things happening in Europe and in the UK, where they acknowledge coercive control in their laws, regarding domestic abuse. And so they're using, in this survey, they're using some of the same metrics that they already used when they developed a way to prove coercive control in partner relationships, and they're wanting to apply it to groups as well. In the United States, we don't have good laws yet. There are some states that are wanting to make coercive control laws. But the way that it would work in the United States would be a little bit different, where if someone, went through horrendous trauma and lost property, maybe had addiction issues, was homeless, had all, was separated from their children or their elderly parents, they could bring a lawsuit personally against the group. And then this research would be used by the expert witness that would come to court and say, there's this research, and they would cite the research. And it might help people to reestablish contact with their children that were still in the group, or elderly parents who needed help, or get reimbursed for the trauma that they were caused. Or it might, with lawmakers in the future, if lawmakers got on board and recognized the harm through this research, they might make it a human rights violation that would cause groups that do this to lose their tax exempt status. So there's a lot of ways that this research can be used to benefit all of these groups. That's kind of the nice thing. It's tragic, but it's like the one thing that kind of ties all these groups together is the shunning.
I just say, are you familiar with the court case that happened, I would say in the last 5 years, with 3 Amish bishops being found guilty of victim witness intimidation?
I don't think I heard about that one.
Oh, they shunned an Amish woman for not living with her abusive husband.
Oh.
Because originally the home church bishop did not agree with shunning her. But the 3 Amish bishops came in and they shunned her. They put her into bond and they shunned her. And they were found guilty of victim witness intimidation. I will put a link in the comments for people. But that has happened, and it can also impact like parents who are trying to keep their children safe.
Yeah.
In cases like that.
I think now that you mention it, I think I maybe saw just a snippet about that. It sounds familiar. Did that lead to any kind of self-reflection and adjustments internally in the group? Did it make them think, oh, maybe we should rethink our policies or restructure, or not really?
I think it really depends on the type of Amish and how they receive that. Because, for a change to happen, you have to have external pressure, internal pressure, people on the inside who also want change.
Right.
I never want to be like overgeneralized too much, but when you start talking about how that change can happen, one of the ways that change can really be enacted is when there is external pressure, and then you have the internal pressure. So they were found guilty. And hi, Ryan. Yes, Ryan is listening, and Ryan is also an ex-JW. But they were found guilty, and they were fined. It was a slap on the wrist, but it did set a precedent that if you shun people in an effort to make them return to unsafe environments, that is criminal behavior.
Yeah. Wow, that's maybe the one time shunning has come up in the court system in the United States that I know of. I mean, I know a lot of custody issues, but I didn't know about this specifically as, as kind of a human rights abuse coming up in the court.
I'm going to place one link in the comments to that story, but I want to place this link directly to the court transcripts. like, so people can go and read this and understand. In this document, when they say OOAC, it means Old Order Amish Church. Our acronyms, we do love them, right? But yeah, I don't see the shunning come up very often in court documents, but this one did. I do commend the woman for like standing her ground, if you will, and being like, no, I'm not going to put my my children in this environment.
Wow, good for her. That's really commendable, because I think we all know plenty of cases where parents are so intimidated by the shunning that they continue to put their children in harm's way. So that's sadly the exception, but good for her.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So again, like, we invite you to come share your experiences in this research study so that we can collectively have a voice, and that voice can impact many, many people in the future, and hopefully for the good, because if it's informing therapists, and therapists have better language or a better understanding of what this practice of shunning is, why we talk about the mandated social isolation, how it impacts people on a long-term basis.
And it is completely anonymous. So don't feel, I know there's a lot of fear, and there is, kind of difficulty sometimes with follow through. There's a lot of people that will maybe express interest and then be afraid to follow through because they wonder if somehow this might get back to my family or my group. It won't, because the survey is completely anonymous, so your name is not attached. Like, even the researchers, they'll see the data, but they won't see the name. And with the interviews, they will, of course, know who you are, but they will keep that confidential. And when they do the final report, it's just going to be the aggregate data. Or if they talk about a person like me, they would say a woman between the ages of 35 and or 40 and 50 or something. And if there were places, they would change the places. They would change any information that would identify you, so that you should not even be able to read through and say that was me. Or maybe if you knew the story that well, you would. But like basically, this won't be identifying people. They'll keep things confidential.
And another thing is they also have like a debrief once you're done taking the survey, because they do want you to be in as good a place as you can be mentally, and they do want you to like not hopefully have adverse reactions to responding to the survey. I think that
they're very compassionate people. I've met both of the two researchers. They might even get some more researchers, but and coordinate with more universities. But these women are some of the kindest, most compassionate, sensitive people that I know, and they're very, very concerned with mental health, and they want to make sure that people have access. And I know you always mention that in your videos and at the website, the Stop Mandated Shunning website. There's links for people, but definitely that's it is stressful. It's healing to tell our stories, but it's also, it brings up a lot of things. So it can be emotional and overwhelming in the moment, but it's also incredibly satisfying to know that someone is listening, someone cares, and our voices are being heard in a way that is going to bring about change, make a difference. So encourage anyone who can to speak up, because someone is listening.
Well, and not only that, not only is someone listening, you're not alone. Despite the isolation that you may feel, and despite how alone you may feel, Like you're not alone in this. There are other people out there who uh, are willing to be around, to talk to you, to have conversations with you. It's just a matter of like finding the people that you can connect with in a healthy and safe manner.
Yeah.
And I think if we have better language, think about this. If we have better language, okay, I'm an ESL speaker. I'm going to talk about language all day, every day. But if we have better language to define what we experience, how we experience it, how it impacts us today, or even like our experiences in therapy or experiences within these groups versus leaving these groups, like if we have better language around that, it also gives us the opportunity to connect better because then we know better what people are safe for us.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's especially powerful when we inform ourselves of what's happening in other groups, because I think we're so used to the way our group did things or spoke about things, and sometimes it's impossible to get out of that mindset and that language that we were indoctrinated with as children. But then when we hear the stories from people from another group and they explain it, it's so much the same, but it's slightly different, and the terminology is slightly different, and it helps us kind of take a step back and realize what really happened to us, right? I think the understanding this is not right, this was manipulative, I didn't choose this, I didn't sign up for this. Just kind of recognizing how coercive and harmful this practice is, and it's helpful for us. It was really helpful for me to watch the stories of Amish and fundamentalist Mormons and Hasidic Jews, and I could relate to that in such a powerful way. And it also made me, I think we feel like we're turning our back on our own culture if we say, oh, this or that wasn't right.
Mm-hmm.
It's painful, but if we can see like these other groups that are so similar, doing the same things, and we don't have that emotional connection, then finally we can see it in a different way where we're not blaming ourselves. And we're like, oh, yeah, this is a controlling mechanism. It's not my fault. I'm not crazy.
Uh-huh. That's really important. We're coming up on ending this. Thank you, Susanna. It is an important topic. I really appreciate anybody who responds to the survey. Thank you so very much. We really do appreciate that. It matters. But before we close this out, Monica, do you have something that you would say to somebody who is living with the impacts of mandated shunning?
You're not alone, and there are so many resources, and it gets better. So you're going to have highs and lows, and there's nothing that's going to take all of the pain away, but it will be more manageable and more livable. Life gets better. There is a beautiful, wonderful life outside of the high control environment that you are in. And if people are shunning you, they don't deserve the wonderful person that you are. So you're a survivor, and you'll get through this, and you will find true friends who love you without conditions. There are so many people out there. Don't be afraid to try, and it might take some time, but you will make new friends that will be friendships that are so much more meaningful than the ones that you lost.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I think that's really, really important to recognize that there is hope. I always think about this as like sometimes you got to seek out hope. You got to find something to hold on to hold out hope. And do you believe that you're good enough to be worthy of meaningful friendships and relationships out when you're outside of the group? when you left that group, when you no longer live like the Amish way or the Jehovah's Witness way or the Mennonite way or whatever way it is, are you good enough? Do you believe you're good enough? Because I think you are. I don't know if you do, but I do. I believe you're good enough. And I
Yes,
do
I
want to
think
give a caveat here. Mandated shunning is not the same thing. Like setting boundaries with somebody is not the same thing as mandated shunning at all whatsoever. And maybe we'll have to touch on that at a later date.
Yeah.
But I almost think that could be an entire podcast episode.
Yeah.
Like mandated shunning versus setting boundaries. Those are two completely different things. One is mandated by the group you're a part of for you to belong. Like you have to engage in certain things. And for you, yeah, you're good enough though. I'm telling you, you're good enough, whether you believe it or not. But you had something to say, Monica?
I think the people that can come out of these really high control environments, we had all the cards stacked against us. We were not able to develop normally and just grow into ourselves and learn what we like and what we don't like and develop our own personality. But so we kind of have to go through our adolescence after we go like, so I was 40 and I was figuring out who I was going through those emotions that most people have when they're 13, 14, 15. But I think the people who go through this process are the most amazing people. I think you will come out of this, whoever you are, being a better person, a stronger person, just a more amazing person, and you'll be proud of yourself for what you accomplished and amazed looking back at what you went through. Most people don't have to go through that sort of thing in their life. And you'll come out of it much better, much stronger. So just hang in there.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank everybody for listening, for engaging with this content. Thank you for the comments. As always, like, comment, share, and subscribe. I want to thank our Patreon guests and our Patreon subscribers. This was produced by the Misfit Amish and our Patreon supporters. Art use in this production by BJK. And until